Well, I'm joined by Bishop Martyn today outside this lovely rural church in the diocese during a time of significant challenge in not only the UK but for the whole world economy. And we're here to do something that polite British people don't do very well, and perhaps churches especially so, to talk about money. But as we emerge from 2 years of not being able to consistently welcome people into our churches, or more importantly engage socially with them, many churches are finding it difficult to bounce back. And for many church leaders, both ordained and lay, and for congregations, we're aware it's quite an anxious time. As we know, the economic situation is challenging for everyone, for parishes and for individuals, but also for the diocese. So I'm wondering, can you tell us what the challenge looks like? What is the financial situation currently in the diocese?
Well, thank you, John, for the question. And I'm very conscious, first of all, that for a lot of people, this is very real on a personal and family level. So I've had conversations recently with clergy, with diocesan staff and others in our communities, where I know that a lot of people are struggling in a very real way at the moment, but also looking to the future and thinking, how am I going to manage in the future? So I'm very conscious that before ever we talk about money in the diocese, we just need to acknowledge that wider situation that we're in and the real personal costs within that. So this is real for individuals, for their families, but then also that does have an effect in our churches. So you're right that it is having a big impact for a lot of local churches as well as for the diocese itself. And you used the term bouncing back after the pandemic, and my sense is that that's varying a lot for different people. So in some of our churches, we're seeing, lots of new activities beginning, lots of people coming along for new things. Really exciting and a sense of a new beginning almost. Whereas for other churches, there's a real sense of anxiety, people not wanting to come back to things and very cautious about attending anything. So it's a very mixed picture across the diocese. But it's certainly having a big impact in terms of parish contributions that are coming into the diocese, and we're facing some hard decisions.
So the current situation, as you've just outlined, does feel stark in many ways. But is there hope to be found? I wonder, what have you noticed about the resilience of our churches and congregations over these last 18 months, couple of years?
I've seen a lot of signs of new life. I think even through, the darkest days of the pandemic, a good number of our churches were at the very heart of the community response to the pandemic. So some amazing stories that I've heard of churches really, pulling out all the stops to be able to serve their wider communities. So I think that's built a lot of goodwill within those communities. And I think in some places, certainly we're seeing that response even now, with people wanting to get involved in the life of their local churches. But as I say, it's a very, very mixed picture. And for others, it's been a real struggle where people have been unwell, where people have suffered loss and so on through the pandemic. It's a very different picture. So I think overall, what I'm most encouraged about is churches really being attentive to their local communities, paying attention to what they see God doing within those communities. Churches being very creative in the way that they respond to the challenges that they're facing, and they are different in the different parts of the diocese. But I think underlying all of that is this sense of generosity as well. So even where this cost of living increase and so on is really squeezing things, we have seen some lovely examples of generosity, and churches quite voluntarily offering a little bit of extra money to the diocese, or offering to help out a local charity, just as a way of expressing that generosity. So I do see real encouragements there, but there's no getting away from the backdrop of real hardship.
So thinking now about parish contribution offers, when parishes are thinking about their parish contribution, are they simply thinking about paying for their priest's salary and housing and all of that kind of thing? Or is there something bigger about Christian generosity that should be factored in?
So I think it's a bit of both, isn't it, really? I think when people give money to something, they want to know that they're giving to something tangible, something real. They want to know it's going to make a difference, that it's going to affect change in some way. So I'm very conscious that for a lot of people in our churches, people give for local ministry. They want a priest in their parish who will serve people in the church and in the community and so on. So I completely get that. But I do want to say that there has to be something more to it than that. And for two reasons, I think, really. One is because the whole reason we exist as a diocese is to be reminded that the local congregation that we're a part of is not the sum total of the church. We're part of something much bigger. And the diocese is all about linking churches together so that the better off can help the less well off, so that those who are going through a really hard time can be supported by those who are struggling in all sorts of ways. So the diocese exists to express that sense of being one family together, genuinely being brothers and sisters together who help one another out in different times. The second bit, though, is that I think there's something bigger as well, in the sense of generosity being core to understanding of what it means to be a Christian. That actually the Christian life is about expressing the values, if you like, of God's kingdom and what God asks of us in Jesus Christ. So money is incredibly important. It's often said Jesus talked almost more about money than anything else, because it is an expression of what we value. How we use our money expresses what we value. So the value of generosity, of being willing to give away to others, as well as being willing to receive, because we operate in both ways. We both give and receive at different times in our lives, maybe. But it is core to what it means to be a Christian, to be a follower of Jesus Christ. So in thinking about parish contributions, yes, it is about ministry in your area. We want to ensure that that ministry can continue, even though it may look different in the future. But it's also about expressing your part in the life of the Diocese of Leicester, your part in the Church of England, the global Anglican Church, and indeed your part as a Christian, a follower of Jesus Christ, living out the value of generosity.
So I wonder, can you talk us through the numbers? What kind of deficit are we facing, and what kind of increase in parish offer do we need? Put very simply, what do the sums look like?
So put very, very simply, and that's the level that I operate on, others look after the detail of the finances, but very simply, the money that we receive from parishes, their generous offering to the diocese, is about £4 million every year. Now that sounds like a lot of money, but it's when you then put it against the money that we spend to pay for clergy, so that's clergy stipends, housing, pensions, all these sorts of things. So ministry in parishes, we currently spend getting on for £6 million. That means there is a very simple but very stark difference. And this is leaving aside numbers of diocesan staff who are paid for separately, and we've significantly reduced the numbers of diocesan staff recently. It's leaving aside all sorts of other bits that we have to pay for and so on. Just simple parish ministry, there is a gap of about £1.5 million, maybe even £2 million in what we receive compared to what we have to pay. Now, it doesn't take a genius to understand, therefore, that that is not sustainable. We cannot carry on paying out more than we are receiving in. So at its very basic level, to make the books balance, we would have to cut the number of stipendiary clergy quite significantly. Now, of course, add on top of that then another layer, which is that inflation has gone up significantly and is predicted to go up even further, which means all our costs are going to get even more expensive in the coming years, and that gap only grows bigger and bigger. Now that's serious, but I do believe actually we can do something about that. I'm confident in three things in particular, I suppose. First and foremost, confident in God. I do believe that God supplies all that we need to do what we've been called to do. The question is always, what is God calling us to do, and what is God not calling us to do? So if we're clear on what God is calling us to do, we can have confidence that God will supply. But secondly, I have confidence actually in the generosity of our parishes. That generosity has been shown in so many ways recently, and I'm sure there will be a generous response. I know that some parishes have been trying to hold money in reserve for the rainy day. We all try and do that, I know. The reality, of course, is it is raining now, and now is not the time to be building up our reserves. Rather, now is the time to be spending and being generous towards others. So I'm confident parishes will respond, but I'm also then confident that the national church is going to help us. You may have heard announcements recently that the church commissioners are releasing more money to help dioceses. The difference is they are not just going to give us that money as a sort of block grant just to underwrite the diocese. Rather, they're going to give it towards particular needs and particular things that are important at this time. In particular, I think that's going to be around work with children and young people in our schools. So we are hopeful that we will get the support from the National Church towards that area in particular. So putting those things together, I think the challenge is very significant. But I do believe that actually there will be a good response, both locally and nationally, and above all, a response of trust in God.
So you spoke about an increase in parish contribution of perhaps something close to inflation. When I look at the news, the inflation figure seems to change almost all the time. What sort of numbers then are you thinking of?
Well, I think at the moment, yes, with inflation not far off the sort of 10% figure, yes, an increase of somewhere around 8 to 10% obviously would be what we would need just to keep pace with the rising costs. I mean, more than that, a 15% increase obviously would then give us the ability to start to address this, the gap that we have in our funding. But I realise that's a huge ask for our parishes. So I think my real appeal is to consider that sort of 8 to 10% increase, which would make a big difference in the diocese.
So finally, you're our bishop. I was in a school with you, a primary school, a few weeks ago, and you were showing the youngsters there your bishop's crook and talking about your role as a shepherd of God's people. Just wonder, in that sort of role as our shepherd here in the diocese, whether you've got any words of encouragement for us, despite all of these challenges.
So I love the image of the shepherds, and I love going into schools and actually showing the shepherd's crook. The children are always fascinated by it. But I think it's important for me for a number of reasons, not just because it was used by Jesus and indeed various other places in the Bible, but also because I think it's a sense for me of the primary role of caring for people. So the shepherd who cares for the sheep, who ensures that they get the food and the sustenance and so on that they need. But also the realization that the shepherd can't do that on their own. That actually the shepherd can lead the sheep into the field of green pasture and so on, but it's God who supplies the green pasture. It's not the shepherd who does that. So that lovely sense, I suppose, of working with God. That yes, the shepherd can lead people, the shepherd can encourage and support and so on, but ultimately it's about making sure that people have the access to the sustenance that comes from God's word, the Bible, that comes from the sacraments. These are the core things of the Christian faith. They always have been in the church and they always will be. And in that sense, nothing is changing. And yet everything is changing, because the way shepherds do their work today is very different from the way shepherds did their work in the time of Jesus. So the core remains the same, but the way that's expressed has to change. And that, just for me, I suppose, is the image that I have of what is happening in the church at the moment. The core remains the same. Everyday faith, the desire that God's kingdom would come here on earth as in heaven. The reading of God's word, the celebration of the sacraments. These things do not change. And our core task is to provide that for God's people throughout this diocese. But how we go about doing that may well have to change in the coming years and months. But I do that in the knowledge that it is God who supplies, not me. It's God who does it. And we look in faith and trust to God.